U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action commissioned a new report called The Potential for U.S. Agriculture to be Greenhouse Gas Negative, which was authored by an independent group of 26 leading research scientists and peer-reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. This report, which was published by the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, or CAST, is a literature review. We will include a link in the description for you to learn more. In this report, it featured 5 different opportunities, and we will be covering each opportunity individually with one of the many authors involved in the study. Today, our focus is on soil carbon management. We are joined with one of the many authors involved in the study and provided valuable input on this opportunity. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Ellis. She focuses on soil and crop sciences at Colorado State University. Well, Dr. Ellis, to get started, can you provide a high-level overview of your involvement in the opportunity focused on soil carbon management?
Yes, definitely. So at the time of writing the report, I was beginning my PhD research under Dr. Keith Postian. And for my research, I wanted to propose a project that looked at what management practices really increase soil carbon on farms. And I particularly wanted to focus on what practices are already being used by farmers and what can be really easily integrated into existing production systems. So my advisor, Dr. Keith Postian, offered me the opportunity to work on this report and do an in-depth literature review and analysis of the potential for practices like cover crops and no-till and converting to perennial biomass energy systems to sequester carbon across the US. So the chapter starts with a high-level overview and framing of the science, summarizing what we know about how carbon is stabilized in soils, and also how we measure this potential, kind of the state of the art of science of, how we measure carbon across landscapes, and as well as how we model this carbon using computer modeling systems. And then the chapter goes into an overview of how the soil health principles, or they might be known as the principles of regenerative agriculture, how those principles should increase carbon in the soil, kind of providing the ecological overview of like why these practices should work in theory. And what we know about practices like no-till and cover crops and diverse rotations, what potential these practices have to increase soil organic matter, and then therefore the carbon that's contained in that soil organic matter. So those practices are minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing diversity, keeping the soil covered year-round, maintaining living roots in the soil, integrating livestock back into cropping systems, and then most importantly, understanding the context of each farm system and how we apply these practices in that unique context. So yeah, that was kind of the goal of this chapter and what's contained within it.
Well, first off, what a great opportunity for you to be involved in this and be amongst many other researchers. But you guys really kept your focus areas, which has been really exciting to see. And as we'll find, you gave a really great high level, but there's a lot of different players and parts and pieces in soil carbon management. So I want to read a piece from the report and then get your insight on it, Elizabeth. So the report says the exact amount of carbon stored within the soil profile is dependent upon soil type and climate. For example, fine textured soils in cool, moist environments of the Midwest will accrue more carbon than the same practices in warmer climates of the Southeast, which has a more coarse textured soils. Can you share some insight on this?
Yeah, so we know there are many factors that influence the amount of organic matter that's stored in soils. It's really like dependent on how soils form over time, regardless of how we manage them. And yeah, kind of the factors to look at are how much carbon is going into the system, and carbon's introduced to the system through plants, through roots, through anything, through photosynthesis. It's plants taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting that carbon into their plant parts, whether it be above ground or below ground. So that's how carbon ends up in the system. And it leaves the system through decomposition, through soil organisms, microorganisms, using that carbon and releasing CO2 through that process. So it's really a matter of in versus out. And in climates that are warm year round, like in the Southeast, those are really favorable conditions for decomposition. So even though there's a lot of plants growing because it's warm and wet, those conditions for decomposition are there year round. So there's a lot of carbon lost. Where in a place like the Midwest that has cold winters and warm summers, there's really favorable conditions for plant growth. But then during the winter, decomposition really slows down. So that's how a lot of carbon is stored over time. And then another important factor is texture. We know that clay-rich soils have a lot higher potential to store and stabilize carbon because organic matter can be bound to clay surfaces, provides a lot more surface area for that organic matter to like stick in the soil, where sandy soils, there isn't that surface area for organic matter to stick. Yeah, so texture really matters and climate really matters. So yeah, the potential isn't equal across the US. There are particular places where a lot more carbon can be stored. And the Midwest is one of those regions. The Mississippi River area is another region, just because there's a lot of potential to increase the amount of plant matter being produced. So yeah, it really requires us thinking of the US and all of its complexity and finding which practices work best in which areas.
Right. And we'll cover that later in this interview, talking about some of those challenges across the United States. Dr. Ellis, can you talk about this, or can you speak to the emerging technologies in this space?
Yeah. So our report first summarizes technologies that are well in use and easily adopted across the US and our many production systems. There is a lot of potential in those, but then there's emerging technologies that are, yeah, increasingly being developed and used on working farms across the US. And one of those exciting technologies is biochar. So biochar is a substance that kind of mimics what happens when like a wildfire happens. Organic matter is combusted at really high temperatures and under pressure. So this process is called pyrolysis. It's a way of like making really stable carbon really quickly by combusting things at really high temperatures and pressures. So this biochar substance is like this black, really carbon-rich, porous material that you can apply to farms like you would manure or compost. And this has the potential to just increase a lot of stable carbon in the system right away. And it has a lot of great co-benefits for production. It can increase water retention, nutrient retention, supports the microbial community by providing new habitats and little spaces for the microbial community to thrive. But there are some trade-offs to consider with producing biochar as well. Not all biochar is created equally, and it can take a lot of energy and feedstock to produce it. So we need to be aware of like the whole system and if it is really sequestering more carbon than it is producing. So with each of these technologies, we need to consider those potential trade-offs. Other exciting technologies are genetically or engineering crops to sequester, to allocate more carbon below ground. Most of the carbon that enters the soil enters through the roots or the carbon exudates that are released by the roots. So if we can create crops that release more carbon below ground, there's a high potential to store more over time. And there are amazing efforts in this space to develop perennial grain crops. Like if you've heard of Kernza, that's a really good example. So trying to produce grain crops that are perennials, we grow them year after year. But hopefully they'll have similar yields to annual crops. So yeah, that's a pretty difficult task, but yeah, a worthwhile effort for many reasons. Yeah, and then another emerging technology that we actually don't mention in this chapter, but is definitely something to look out for, is enhanced rock weathering. So this is applying silicate or carbonate rock material that's finely ground, applying that to the soil. And then those rocks can react with the CO2 in the atmosphere and water, and they form bicarbonate, which is a really stable carbon material. And yeah, studies have shown that applying these stable rocks can also have a lot of benefits for productivity, like slowly providing nutrients to the soil or helping to buffer acidic soils. Um, so yeah, this is another emerging technology that I'm keeping my eye on and learning more about.
Right. A lot of exciting things that are happening. But like Dr. Ellis mentioned right in the beginning, there are those basic cover crops, reduced tillage, no till, a lot of those practices that are still in place. If you're thinking, oh, biochar, that's just not for my farm, there are a variety of different options. And we've heard this before on Farm Food Facts. There's no prescription of what farmers need to do. You need to find what best fits on your farm. Let's cover some of those challenges. And I'd like to read one that kind of stems from the report. It says the carbon sequestration potential for a given soil depends on the type, cropping history, climate, current production system, and the associated management practices. How have you seen this be a challenge across the United States? And is there certain parts of the US that this opportunity might be even more challenging?
Yeah. So there are, like you just mentioned, practices like no-till and cover crops and diversified rotations can fit in really easily to some existing production systems. Like in the Midwest, integrating cover crops and no-till into a corn and soybean rotation can be fairly easy if you have the right technical support services and the available financial support to make that transition happen. Especially on clay-rich soils, integrating no-till is often easier than on sandy soils. And in areas where there's ample precipitation year-round, cover crops are a lot easier. So yeah, in a place like the Midwest, those practices are fairly easy to integrate, where in a place like Colorado or places where precipitation is limited and soils are sandy, those practices might be more challenging. Also, organic agriculture systems have a lot of benefits, but it's a lot harder to adopt these kind of practices when tillage is your only weed control. It's really hard to reduce tillage. So yeah, I think to integrate any of these practices, you have to take into account the unique circumstances of the farm system and what's needed to maintain production, because that's the most important part of this is like we need to be growing food on agricultural lands. And that can't be sacrificed in order to adopt these practices. So yeah, it's really integrating what works in that unique system.
Right. We don't want to cut down on yields, and we want to make sure that those farms are being financially and economically sustainable as well. What other challenges do you see for farmers and ranchers to make this happen?
Yeah, I think, yeah, adopting a new practice and transitioning to new practices isn't easy, especially if you've done things one way your entire life and maybe don't have the appropriate equipment or the appropriate mentorship to know how to make these practices work in your unique farm system. So yeah, financial and technical assistance are really essential. We've also found through some of our collaborative research with social scientists at CSU that peer-to-peer mentoring and social network support really matters. Yeah, producers are highly influenced by what their neighbors are doing, what their family does, who they're talking to within their networks, and knowing that they have somebody to go to that can yeah, support them in this transition is really important. And also determines just the way that, you know, agricultural communities are responding to change. Change is not an easy thing for anyone in any circumstance. So yeah, it's really, farmers need the appropriate support to make this happen. It's not easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and also just another important thing is to measure the impacts of adopting these practices. We really need like widespread monitoring of soil carbon. Many other countries, like Australia and many countries in Europe, they have like nationwide systems for monitoring soil carbon storage, just like we would monitor clean air or clean water. To know that these programs are working, we need to measure it. So yeah, we need to allocate resources to that as well. And that really is no small feat. Measuring carbon is challenging and requires a lot of people on the ground taking samples, as well as developing models that can predict these carbon stocks over time. So that's a really important part of this challenge as well.
Right. And it's not easy when we have so many different landscapes that we're working with, finding that one metric that works and scoring people on things. That can be a really big challenge. Two more questions for you. What needs to be done to make this successful?
Yeah, I think I would just go back to, we need to like all be on board to support farmers in this transition. There's no there's no one easy task to make this transition go smoothly. It'll take a coordinated effort of financial and technical assistance, um, supporting peer-to-peer mentoring networks, supporting grassroots organizations that are already supporting farmers. Yeah, it's a really coordinated effort across government, at the federal level, the state level, the local level, and just, yeah, getting farmers that are already really on board and doing this well, getting them to be key leaders in this effort and supporting their neighbors to do the same.
Right. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but there could be some really great outcomes that come from this. Last question for you, Dr. Ellis. What do you want people to take away from this opportunity focused on soil carbon management?
Yeah, I'd say I want people to recognize that there really is a lot of potential to increase soil carbon in soils across our country. And a lot of this comes from just the way soils have been mismanaged throughout history. We've depleted a lot of the carbon and the organic matter that's in soils that plays such an important role in fertility, in water holding capacity, in reducing erosion. That organic matter and the carbon within that organic matter has so many roles in our soil systems, and it goes far beyond just mitigating climate change. Like the reasons to do this are, yeah, essential to like maintaining the productivity of our soils over time. So whether or not you, yeah, think mitigating climate change is important, there are like so many reasons to start adopting these practices. And as climate changes over time, um, challenges are going to intensify with maintaining productivity on farmland. And improving that organic matter is one of the best ways to increase the resilience of farmland and support farmer livelihoods over time. So, yeah, the reasons are manyfold for why we should do this. It's one of the
Right.
takeaways.
Most farms are generational. They're always thinking about that next generation. This is one key point that can really make you think, is my farm or ranch going to continue? How is your soil carbon management? Maybe that needs to be put into your future plans and working on with your succession plan with your future generation. Well, this has been a really insightful interview with you, Dr. Ellis. We appreciate the time that you have spent learning about this and now educating our listeners on it. Uh, USFRA plays the critical important role of creating opportunities for collaboration, information sharing, and solution development for the full agricultural value chain. This report is proof of that. So is this interview. I highly recommend you check out the report. There is a link in the description below. We appreciate your time. And if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app. Tune in again. I'm Joanna Guza for Farm Food Facts.